Hi, I'm David D. Hilster. I am a critical thinker, dissident scientist, and I'm here to tell you the truth about science. Something your university professors won't tell you, the mass media won't tell you, and certainly those science evangelists won't tell you. I'm here to talk to my dissident friends, those critical thinkers outside the mainstream, and also to those people who believe in the mainstream, for you to know we know this, and that is the mainstream won't change no matter how much evidence you have against something. For instance, relativity. We have we have data against relativity. We have GPS, which looks like it adds c plus v, which is faster than the speed of light. Shouldn't be able to do that. Totally against special relativity. We have no bending of light outside of coronas. It should be bending according to general relativity. It does not. That is verified by NASA scientists. We seem to ignore that. So what I'm telling everybody is mainstream will not change. It's an emotional problem. They don't want to change everything they've learned throughout the years. They're too tired, they're too invested in it, and they have lots of people around them to feel comfortable about. Just like alcoholics will feel good when they're with other people drinking because they enable that atmosphere of drinking, and you feel better that way. If you have everybody saying, "Oh, relativity is the most important thing, and it's the most amazing theory," and those who think against it, they just want to be Einsteins, then of course you are feeling good emotionally because you've got lots of people. It's really hard to buck the trend. But there's a lot of dissidents who want to. They'll want to try to use terminology that will please the mainstream. They will use the word like dark energy. They'll use the words like physical characteristics that are used in particle physics, like the neutrino. They'll have a new model of the atom, so they'll make sure they can include the quark, the neutrino, all of those things, even though they don't exist. That is because we've invented them and pretended to find them. But the dissidents many times will cater to mainstream ideas, hoping that they'll read it and they'll see the light. Well, you can't just go out there and smack them in the face and tell them, "Hey, Einstein's wrong." Well, in fact, for my movie, someone had suggested that my movie's title be "Goodbye, Einstein, Hello, Karazani." But it wasn't about Riccardo Karazani, but that was sort of like, well, you don't want to just say Einstein wrong. Well, I have this theory. I call it the dead soldier theory. The dead son, the mother's dead soldier's son theory. And that is, if you are a person in the military and it's your job to go to a parent and tell them that unfortunately their child was lost in a war, you can go up to them and say it in the most amazingly careful way, and something that's extremely tragic to the mother. No matter how you say it, the mom's going to break down as if you yelled it out to her cruelly, or if you just said it as nice as you can. It's the shock of what you're telling them that matters. So if you, for instance, and I tried this with neutrinos, to say, "Hey, I think, are neutrinos, how do you detect them? Are we sure that they exist?" All that kind of thing. Well, it turns out that when I sort of couched it way back in the early 90s and was in the alt physics group, because I didn't have all these things like Facebook at that time, well, it turned out once they got to the point and say, "Oh, wait a minute, Dave, are you saying they don't exist?" And I said, "Oh yeah, a scientist friend of mine discovered why they were postulated. It was to save special relativity, or special relativity's flaws, and because of that, we don't need the neutrino. In fact, if you take out the flaw in relativity, you get the autodynamic equations, which you can then use without the neutrino." Then all hell broke loose. It didn't matter how nice. I couched it as best as I could, and didn't matter. It was the death of the neutrino that mattered. It didn't matter how I said it. It's the same way you tell them the death of something, people are going to react violently, no matter how you deliver the message. So those who are critical thinkers, those who are critical, those are dissident thinkers outside of mainstream, you are not going to convince mainstream that things are hunky-dory and that your theory or your idea is right. It's not going to happen. You have to work pretty much on your own. Now, I tried also to convince dissidents to be careful, because they will, because of that attitude, reproduce things in mainstream that aren't correct. The neutrino doesn't exist. The quark doesn't exist. The Higgs boson doesn't exist. They've invented all these things. As I say many times, Dr. Unzicker threw out particle physics starting in 1930, and I think even before that. And what happens? Well, you get people saying, well, you know, I have a new theory. I've got to be able to describe these things. And Dave, I don't subscribe to that neutrinos don't exist. I don't subscribe to quarks don't exist. Because why? They've invented this theory, this model for the atom. They've fallen in love with it. They ignore the evidence or counter evidence for what the mainstream does. And then they try to appease it. Look at this new model for the same thing. You know, they're not going to go for it. Newton spent the rest of his life arguing his ideas, which is stuff like velocity equals distance over time, force equals mass times acceleration. Those things, his colleagues, his contemporaries of his day, were buying that. And we sit there, we don't see that. We weren't with Newton to see all the pushback he probably got, and the pushback that we know that he got. So why is it that we dissidents insist on not only appeasing the mainstream, but we want to many times copy the bad things in the mainstream? It's just totally ridiculous. It's just not something that makes sense. So again, my advice to both the people in the mainstream, critical thinkers, is to realize you are not going to change people's mind. The old adage that they have to die out for a new paradigm shift to happen is exactly right. No matter how sweet talking, no matter how much you use their lingo, no matter how much you try to include them, they're not going to change. And dissidents as well, they're all trying different things. We all have our different models. We have the ether model. My father and I have the particle model. All these models are trying to find and compete in some sense. And as Dr. Unzicker says, we need to really just keep our heads down and work on our own. That's what we need to do. If some other people follow what you're doing and like it, like we have some people who like our model, great. If not, great. It all will fall out in the wash eventually. But the big lesson here is that the mainstream is not changed. They don't change their mind. There's nothing in history of 3,000 years of science history, which I've read about, trying to look at paradigm shifts. I never saw a case where a paradigm shift happened and the people who were in the other boat, the people who believed the Earth was the center of the solar system, the people who believed the Earth was flat, those people didn't change. They went to their graves defending what they believed in. So, lesson to be learned. You're not going to convince the mainstream. You shouldn't be repeating their mistakes, and you should go straight ahead. Don't worry about acceptance. Worry about doing what you think is the right answer, because if it's right and it's really good, people will follow you. So remember what I always say. Don't take what anybody says on faith. Stay critical. Stay thinking. I'm Dave D. Hilster. I'm your science therapist. I'm trying to teach you the ropes here, folks. Something you're not going to learn in school, and something those physics evangelists certainly aren't going to tell you, because they're only interested in telling you how smart they think they are, even though they're not. Ciao for now.